when two overzealous HOA enforcers crossed the line and laid hands on my wife over a minor lawn dispute. They had no idea they were about to face the wrath of a retired Navy SEAL with decades of combat experience and a fierce resolve to protect his family. I never thought I'd have to use my training again. Not here, not in the quiet suburbs of Maple Grove, where the biggest battles were supposed to be over, whose turn it was to host the neighborhood barbecue. My name is Jack Brennan, and I'm a retired Navy SEAL, 52 years old, with 25 years of service under my belt. I've seen war zones, defused hostage situations, and stared down threats most people can't even imagine. But nothing, prepared me for the day two HOA enforcers thought they could bully my wife, Sarah, and walk away unscathed. It all started on a crisp October morning in 2024. Sarah and I had moved to Maple Grove 3 years ago, trading the chaos of military life for a peaceful retirement. The neighborhood was picture perfect, tidy lawns, white picket fences, and a homeowners association that seemed to have a rule for everything. At first, we didn't mind. I'd spent my career following orders, so a few community guidelines about fence heights or mailbox colors didn't faze me. Sarah, always the diplomat, even joined the HOA's social committee to help smooth things over with the neighbors. She's 48, a former ER nurse, tough as nails but with a heart of gold. She'd seen her share of chaos too, patching up soldiers and civilians alike during my deployments. Together, we were a team, unbreakable, or so I thought. The trouble began with our lawn. We'd always kept it neat, but that fall, Sarah decided to plant a small wildflower garden in the front yard. She wanted something vibrant, something to remind her of the fields near her childhood home in Virginia. The wildflowers were a mix of native species, black-eyed Susans, coneflowers, and milkweed, chosen to attract pollinators. She'd checked local regulations, even called the county to make sure it was eco-friendly and compliant. We thought we were in the clear. But the Maple Grove HOA had other ideas. Their rulebook, a 47-page monstrosity, had a vague clause about maintaining a uniform aesthetic. Apparently, our wildflowers didn't fit their vision of suburban perfection. We got our first warning letter in early September, citing non-compliant landscaping. Sarah, ever the peacemaker, wrote back politely, explaining the ecological benefits and offering to meet with the HOA board. They didn't respond. Instead, we got a second letter a week later, this time with a $50 fine and a demand to remove the garden within 10 days. I'll admit, I was annoyed, but I told Sarah to let it go. "We'll rip out a few flowers, pay the fine, and move on," I said. I didn't want her stressing over something so petty. She agreed, reluctantly, and we planned to replant the wildflowers in the backyard. But the HOA wasn't done with us. On October 12th, I was out back splitting firewood for the winter. Sarah was in the front yard, starting to dig up the wildflower bed to comply with the HOA's demands. I could hear her humming softly, the way she does when she's trying to stay calm despite being upset. That's when I heard raised voices. I dropped the axe and jogged around the house, my instincts kicking in. What I saw made my blood run cold. Two men, both in their late 30s, stood on our front lawn, looming over Sarah. They wore khakis and polo shirts with the HOA's logo stitched on the chest, official enforcers, or as I later learned, members of the HOA's compliance committee. One was tall and lanky, with a clipboard and a smug grin. The other was stockier, red-faced, and clearly agitated. Sarah was kneeling by the flower bed, her gardening gloves streaked with dirt, trying to explain herself. The stocky guy was shouting, pointing at the flowers like they were a federal offense. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Mrs. Brennan," the lanky one said, his tone dripping with condescension. "This is your third violation. We can escalate this to a lien on your property." Sarah stood up, brushing dirt off her knees. "I'm removing the flowers right now," she said, her voice steady but firm. "We've already agreed to comply. There's no need for this." The stocky guy stepped closer, too close, his face inches from hers. "You think you're above the rules? We've got families here who care about property values. You're bringing this whole neighborhood down." I was about 20 feet away, closing the distance fast, but before I could reach them, the stocky guy grabbed Sarah's arm, yanking her toward the flower bed. "Start digging faster, or we'll do it for you," he snarled. That's when Sarah stumbled, her ankle twisting as she tried to pull free. She cried out, and I saw red. In 25 years as a SEAL, I'd learned to control my emotions, to channel anger into precision. But seeing that man's hand on my wife, seeing her in pain, flipped a switch I hadn't touched since my last mission. I was on them in seconds. "Get your hands off her," I said, my voice low, the kind of calm that makes people freeze. The stocky guy let go of Sarah and turned, sizing me up. I'm 6 feet 2 inches, 210 pounds, and even at 52, I train every day. Push-ups, pull-ups, and a 5-mile run to keep the edge I honed in the teams. He didn't know who he was dealing with, but he was about to find out. "Who the hell are you?" the stocky guy spat, puffing out his chest. The lanky one took a step back, clutching his clipboard like a shield. "Jack Brennan," I said. "Her husband. And you're on my property, assaulting my wife. You've got 5 seconds to leave." The stocky guy laughed, a nervous edge to it. "We're HOA compliance officers. We have authority here. You're the one who needs to back off." Sarah was rubbing her arm, her face pale but composed. "Jack, I'm okay," she said, but I could see the red marks where his fingers had gripped her. That was enough. I stepped forward, closing the gap between me and the stocky guy. "You don't have authority to touch anyone," I said. "Last chance. Walk away." The lanky one started babbling about fines and legal action, but the stocky guy wasn't backing down. He shoved me, or tried to. His hands barely made contact before I sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and twisted it behind his back in one fluid motion. He yelped, dropping to his knees as I applied just enough pressure to make it clear I could break his arm if I wanted to. The lanky guy froze, his clipboard shaking in his hands. "I'm not going to ask again," I said. "Leave. Now." The stocky guy was gasping, his face redder than before. "You're done, man. You're gonna regret this," he sputtered, but he didn't fight back. I released him, and he scrambled to his feet, clutching his wrist. The two of them stumbled back to their golf cart. Yes, they'd driven a golf cart to harass us, and sped off down the street. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide. "Jack, you didn't have to do that," she said, but there was a hint of relief in her voice. "They put their hands on you," I said. "That's a line they don't cross. We thought that was the end of it. We were wrong." The next day, we got a certified letter from the HOA, signed by the president, a woman named Karen Whitaker. It accused me of assaulting compliance officers and threatened legal action unless we paid a $5,000 fine and removed the wildflower bed immediately. Attached was a grainy photo from a neighbor's security camera, showing me restraining the stocky guy. Conveniently, it didn't show him grabbing Sarah first. Sarah was furious. "They're twisting this, Jack," she said, pacing the kitchen. "We need to fight this. They can't just bully us into submission." I nodded, my mind already working. In my SEAL days, I'd learned that battles aren't won by reacting. They're won by planning, gathering intel, and striking when the enemy least expects it. The HOA might have thought they had the upper hand, but they didn't know who they were up against. First, we needed evidence. Sarah had bruises on her arm, so we took photos and went to her old colleague, Dr. Mark Ellis, at the local urgent care. He documented the injury and wrote a report confirming it was consistent with being forcibly grabbed. Next, I pulled the footage from our own security cameras, which I'd installed after a string of package thefts the previous year. The video clearly showed the stocky guy grabbing Sarah and her stumbling in pain. It was gold. But I knew the HOA wouldn't back down without a fight. I'd dealt with bureaucrats before, petty tyrants who think they're untouchable because they've got a title and a rulebook. So, I did what I'd done countless times in the field. I went on the offensive. I started by researching the HOA board. Karen Whitaker, the president, was a real estate agent with a reputation for micromanaging the neighborhood. The two enforcers were Greg Tanner, the stocky guy, and Paul Hensley, the lanky one, both volunteers who'd been given way too much power. Greg was a former car salesman with a temper. Paul was an accountant who seemed to enjoy the authority a little too much. I found their names on the HOA's website, along with a list of every board member and their contact info. Next, I reached out to neighbors. Most were hesitant to talk. Nobody wants to cross the HOA, but a few were fed up. Mrs. Carter, a widow across the street, told me Greg had fined her $200 for leaving her trash cans out an hour past pickup time. Mr. Patel, 2 houses down, said Paul had threatened to tow his car for parking too close to a fire hydrant, even though it was legal. The more I dug, the clearer it became. The HOA was running a racket, using fines and threats to control the neighborhood. Sarah and I decided to attend the next HOA meeting, scheduled for October 20th. We weren't going to play defense. We walked into the community center, a sterile room with folding chairs and a podium, where about 30 neighbors sat whispering. Karen Whitaker stood at the front, her lips pursed like she'd just tasted something sour. Greg and Paul were there too, sitting in the front row, glaring at us as we took our seats. Karen opened the meeting with a speech about community standards and the importance of compliance. Then she brought up our case, without naming us directly. Certain residents, she said, have chosen to defy our rules and even assault our compliance officers. This behavior will not be tolerated. That's when I stood up. "Excuse me, Mrs. Whitaker," I said, my voice carrying the same calm authority I'd used in the field. "If you're talking about me, let's set the record straight. Your compliance officers assaulted my wife, Sarah, over a flower bed. We have video evidence, medical reports, and witnesses. If anyone's facing legal action, it's them." The room went silent. Karen's face turned red, and Greg started to stand, but Paul grabbed his arm, whispering something. I kept going. "This HOA has been bullying residents for too long, fining people for minor infractions, threatening liens, and now physically intimidating my wife. We're not paying your fine, and we're not removing the garden. In fact, we're considering a lawsuit for assault and harassment." A few neighbors gasped. Others nodded, like they'd been waiting for someone to say it. Karen tried to regain control, banging her gavel. "This is not the time for accusations," she snapped. "Sit down, Mr. Brennan, or I'll have you removed." I smiled. "You can try." Sarah squeezed my hand, a silent reminder to stay cool. She stood up next. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "I just want to live in peace. But when your officers grabbed me and caused these bruises," she held up her arm, showing the fading marks, "that crossed a line. We have every right to defend ourselves, and we will." The meeting erupted. Neighbors started shouting, some at us, some at the board. Mrs. Carter stood up and told her story about the trash can fine. Mr. Patel chimed in about the parking threat. By the end, half the room was on our side, demanding answers from Karen and her cronies. That's when I played my ace. "One more thing," I said, holding up my phone. "I've sent our evidence, video, medical reports, and witness statements, to a lawyer friend of mine. He's ready to file a civil suit against the HOA and personally against Greg Tanner and Paul Hensley for assault. Unless you drop this nonsense now, you're looking at a very public, very expensive fight." Karen's gavel hit the podium so hard it cracked. "This meeting is adjourned," she shouted, but nobody listened. The room was chaos, neighbors arguing, some even clapping for us. Greg and Paul slipped out the back, avoiding eye contact. Over the next week, we didn't hear from the HOA. No letters, no fines, no golf carts patrolling our street. I knew they were regrouping, so I kept digging. I found out the HOA's funds, our dues, were being mismanaged. Karen's real estate company was getting consulting fees for vague services, and Greg's brother-in-law had a landscaping contract despite doing shoddy work. I shared this with a few trusted neighbors, and we started organizing. On October 28th, we held an unofficial meeting at our house. 20 residents showed up, more than I'd expected. We laid out the evidence: the assault, the mismanagement, the pattern of intimidation. Mrs. Carter suggested we call for a vote to dissolve the HOA entirely, which was allowed under state law if 2/3 of the homeowners agreed. Mr. Patel offered to help collect signatures. By November 5th, we had 68% of the neighborhood, 82 out of 120 homeowners, signed on to dissolve the HOA. We presented the petition at the next board meeting, along with a formal demand for Karen, Greg, and Paul to resign. Karen tried to fight it, citing bylaws and legal fees, but the numbers didn't lie. The HOA was done. Greg and Paul never apologized, but they moved out of Maple Grove within a month. Karen sold her house and left too, her real estate business tanking after word spread. The wildflower garden stayed, and Sarah even expanded it, adding a small bench where neighbors could sit and